So today we begin the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. And before we start the 13th chapter, I'd like to give you an overview of 13 to 18 chapter so that you have an idea how we are progressing and what we are learning. The, thir- the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita essentially is a very important chapter. Many people find this too difficult because of the confusion in different translations according to different philosophies. And therefore, many people even leave out the 13th chapter because they are unable to understand it. So I may request you to listen to it very carefully. So 13th chapter tells us about the 13th to 18th chapter essentially deal with Prakriti and how to become free from it. The first to the sixth chapter deals with who am I. From 7 to the 12th chapter, the Bhagavad Gita deals with who is God. And from the 13th to the 18th chapter, the question is, what is Prakriti and how do I free myself from it? Of course, the 18th chapter is more or less a summary of the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a conclusion which wraps it up and essentially concludes with surrender. But most definitely, the 13 to 17 all deal with Prakriti and how to become free from it. In the 13th chapter, we will learn about the gross aspects of Prakriti. In the 14th chapter, having understood Prakriti in its macro perspective, we will now understand Prakriti from a micro perspective. Because in the 13th chapter, we deal with Mahat, Pradhan or Avyakta. We deal with so many big macro topics of Prakriti. In the 14th chapter, we deal essentially with Rajas, Sattva, Tamas. And when we learn about these three, we also learn at the conclusion of the 14th chapter how to become free from Prakriti. Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sa gunan samatite tan brahma bhuya kalpate. That by undeviated devotion to Krishna, we can transcend the three gunas, or we can transcend Prakriti. So many people sometimes refer to the 13th to 18th as Jnana Yoga. It's not really Jnana Yoga. It does give you Jnana, but essentially it is all about Bhakti as the means to become free from Prakriti. We will see that here in the 13th chapter, and we'll see that again in the 14th chapter. In the 15th chapter, we will see how using the detachment gained from 13th and 14th, how we allegorically chop down the upside down tree of the world, which is essentially Prakriti, and how we go beyond it. The 16th chapter deals with people who are following Krishna's instructions and following the Shastra, specifically the Bhagavad Gita, and how they acquire Daivi Sampati. It also deals with the demonic natured people or the Asuras. And how do they become demonic natured? Because instead of turning to God, remembering Him and forgetting self, they aggrandize the self, they expand the self, they expand the ego, and consequently they become demonic because they've turned in the opposite direction. And thus they are extremely bound to Prakriti, specifically Rajaguna. And then he concludes by saying that they can also be saved, they can also be rescued if they follow the scripture. This is very important in the Bhagavad-Gita. In the 16th chapter, Krishna points out that यह शास्त्र विधि मुत्सृज्य वर्तते कामकारता न स सिद्धिम अवाप्नोति न सुखम न पराम गति. That it is by following the Shastra, specifically here the Bhagavad Gita, you can go beyond Prakriti. And you can attain peace, perfection, the supreme destination. Tasmat Shastram Pramanam Te Karya Karya Vivastito. Then in the 17th chapter, Krishna is asked by Arjun that, all right, there are people who are not opposed to God, but they're ignorant of the scripture. And such people who are ignorant of the scripture, but yet want to worship God, what happens to them? And then Krishna explains how the gunas affect faith, how the gunas affect sacrifice, and so on, so forth, how the gunas affect austerity for those who are not guided by the scripture. And then finally, the 18th chapter wraps it up. So here in the 13th chapter, which we are beginning now, we are dealing with very important subjects. And the subject matters that are going to be discussed and introduced are throughout the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna has always referred to Brahman, but he has never elaborated on Brahman. Now, for the first time in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna elaborates on Brahman. Similarly, in the 13th chapter, a new topic is introduced, and that topic is Paramatma. That till now, Paramatma was never discussed. Now, for the first time, Paramatma is introduced, and of course, it is elaborated in great detail in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So you will now understand that there is the Jivatma or the individual soul, there is a Paramatma who is the representation of the Lord within your heart. You will also begin to understand that besides the Jivatma and the Paramatma, there's an all-pervading Brahman, which is another aspect of God. And lastly, of course, we have covered in great detail in the first 12 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is Bhagavan, the source of both. In the Bhagavad Puran, this is clearly enunciated. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. The realization of God comes in three stages: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And each of these three stages depends entirely upon how you approach him. Those who approach him only through knowledge experience him as Brahman. Those who approach him through meditation on the Lord within the heart, they realize God as Paramatma. And then there are those who are bhaktas, who are following the Bhagavad Gita perfectly. And such people see Krishna as Bhagavan. To explain this, analogy is given. The analogy is of the sun in the sky, which is like Bhagavan. Then you have the reflection of the sun in the sky in a mirror in your room, which faces the window. And that reflection of the sun in the mirror is called Paramatma. And when you see the sun entering your room with the sunlight, that sunlight, we also call it the sun. That is the representation of Brahman. So we will now go on to understand all these three. we will go on to understand what is Prakriti, because Prakriti is the subject matter from which you have to become free. So in the Bhagavad-Gita, we come to the first verse where Krishna clearly is asked by Arjun. Arjun vacha prakritim purusham chaiva kshetram kshetrajnam evacha etad veditum ichhami jnanam gneyam cha Keshava. O Lord, O Bhagavan, O killer of the Keshi demon, O Krishna, I want to understand Purush and Prakriti, the field and the knower of the field. I want to know what is knowledge, and I want to know what is the object of knowledge. One very important subject matter covered in the 13th chapter is there is a syncretic fusion of several philosophies here, which is why people become completely confused. First of all, when you talk about Purush and Prakriti, you're talking about duality. And when you're talking about Purush and Prakriti, you're talking about the Sankhya philosophy. I've explained to you earlier that the Bhagavad-Gita is indeed a syncretic fusion, a synthesis, a blending of the 6 Ashtikya philosophies or darshanas of the Vedas. And in this chapter, they all come to a head. Purush and Prakriti deal with Sankhya. Brahman deals with Vedanta. And Krishna points out here in this Bhagavad Gita, so chapter 13, that he is Mat Param Brahma, that he is the origin, the source of Brahman. He is, in fact, Brahman is subordinate to him, Mat Param Brahma, which of course he repeats in the 14th chapter in the last verse. Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyasya cha shashvatasya dharmasya sukhasya ekantikasya cha. Where Krishna is concluding in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that he is the source of Brahman, he is the rest of Brahman. It is from him that Brahman emanates. So, all these philosophies are blended. Sankhya is subordinated to Vedanta, and Vedanta is subordinated to Bhagavan, not the Narayaniya philosophy. That is why it becomes a little difficult to understand if you don't understand that this is a blend of philosophies. If you're trying to, interpret this according to your own philosophy, whether it is Advaita or Dvaita or whatever it is, you will become confused. It is really a syncretic fusion of multiple darshanas of the Vedas, the 6 Ashtikya darshanas. And here you have Sankhya, which is Purush and Prakriti. You have Vedanta, which is Brahman. And you also have the mention that Brahman is subordinate to Bhagavan, Mat Param Brahma, which is Narayaniya philosophy. So you could say that the Bhagavad Gita is essentially, when you talk about Jnana in the Bhagavad Gita, it is essentially Sankhya philosophy wrapped in Vedanta and offered to Krishna. I'm repeating this because it's important for you to understand this. The essential strain of knowledge or Gyan in the Bhagavad Gita is Sankhya philosophy. And this Sankhya philosophy is subsumed. It is wrapped up in Vedanta. You'll see that in this chapter. And then this Sankhya wrapped in Vedanta is offered to Bhagavan, who is the source of everything. So in text 1, Krishna says, Arjun says, he wants to know Prakriti, Purush, the Kshetra, the Kshetrajna, what is Jnanam, what is Gneyam. And Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Idam shariram kaunteya kshetram itya abhidiyate etad yo vetti tam prahu kshetrajna iti tad vidah. This body, O son of Kunti, is called the Kshetra. One who knows this body is called the Kshetrajna, say the seers. So what is the Kshetra? We will come to it a little later when we elaborate on Prakriti. But this has already been covered in chapter 7.4 and 7.5, where Krishna explains that Bhumi apo nalo vayur kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara ityam me bhinna prakriti ashtadha. So Krishna is describing in 7.4 what is the kshetra. And he says, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and the ego, these are all part of my separated energies. Bhinna prakriti. And who is the Kshetrajna? That is pointed out in 7.5. In 7.5, Bhagavan Krishna says, Aparayam itastva anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabhao yayedam dharyate jagat. This is pure Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy essentially maintains that there is Purush and there is Prakriti. Many people think of Sankhya philosophy as atheistical, but not so the philosophy of Sankhya and the Bhagavad-Geeta. Krishna, who is the source of Brahman, which is actually the source of Purush and Prakriti, is God. And because he uses consciousness or Purush to impregnate a Prakriti, to impregnate the Mahat, thus you get many individual souls, each of them in their envelope of Prakriti. So we are not just spirit, we are spirit encased in matter. We are spirit in the envelope of Prakriti. So therefore, Krishna here is repeating what he has said in 7.4 and 7.5, and he's going to elaborate on it further. And he says that idam shariram kaunteya, this body, kshetram ityabhidiyate, this is called the kshetra. The earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, ego, this is the kshetra. Etad yo vetti tam prahu kshetrajna iti tadvidah. And one who knows this field is called the kshetrajna. So Prakriti is the envelope, which is the kshetra, and you are the content of the envelope, which is the kshetrajna or the individual soul. Now in chapter 3 comes the bombshell. In chapter 3, in text 3, you get an astounding piece of information. And what is that astounding piece of information? That this knower of the field, this Kshetrajna, this individual soul, is not alone. He has a companion. What do you mean by he has a companion? The Lord is his companion, who is not just the knower of this field, your field, but he is the knower of all fields. Therefore, in text 3 of chapter 13, 13.3, Krishna says, Kshetrajnam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata kshetra kshetrajnyor jnanam Yat tad jnanam matam mama. So this is the brilliant revelation where Krishna says, you are the knower of your field. You are the individual soul who knows your field. But I, Krishna says, I, Bhagavan, is actually within your body, within you, your companion, the knower of all fields. So in the heart, according to Sankhya philosophy, there are two within your heart. This is described in various Sankhya Upanishads. And these various Sankhya Upanishads include the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, the Mundaka Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad. In the Katha Upanishad, it is said, Ritam pibantau sukritasya loke guyam pravishtav parame parardhe chaya tapau brahma vido vadanti panchagnayo cha trina chiketa. In this verse in the Katha Upanishad, it is declared that within the heart, in the cave of the heart, guyam, there are two. One is chaya, one is in shadow, and one is tapau, one is effulgent. One who is in shadow is the Jivatma, one who is effulgent is called the Paramatma. One is Parame, one is supreme, that is Paramatma, the other is Parardhe, who is subordinate, that is the Jivatma. So according to Sankhya, you are not God, you are the individual soul who is accompanied by God, who is your companion. And the verse given to describe that in the Mundak and the Shvetashvatara Upanishad says, Dva suparna sayuja sakhya samanam vriksha parishasvajati tayoranya pipalam swadvatya anashnan tayor abhichikasati. In the tree of your heart, there are two birds. One bird is you, the Jivatma, who is eating the fruits of the tree. And some of the fruits of the tree, what you find in the world, is sweet, some are bitter, and some is tasteless. Some are tasteless. And he says, this Jivatma, that is you, is never satisfied by eating the fruits of the tree, the things in the world. But only when he turns his face from the fruits of the tree towards that Lord who is within his heart, who is his companion. And when he turns from the fruits of the tree to his companion beside him, only then he knows peace. So it's described elsewhere in the Bhagavad also that just like the moon is reflected in multiple pots which contain oil, similarly, the Lord is reflected in each heart as the Paramatma. If you are in any doubt about this, then you will find later in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, very clearly the Lord states, Upadrashta anumantascha bharta bhokta maheshwara parmatmeti chapyukto dehesmin purusha para. So this is the full introduction of Paramatma for the first time in the Bhagavad-Gita. So you are not alone. You have a companion who's always with you. And you will see this discussed elsewhere in the Bhagavad-Gita where Krishna says, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday deshe arjuna tistati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantrarudani maya. Krishna says, I am seated in your heart and I am driving you onward towards your destiny. You are merely seated in a machine made of material energy. And therefore, he says in the next verse, Tam eva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata. Tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapshashi shashvatam. Simply surrender to this Lord who is in your heart, and he will take you towards peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. See, wealthy people often have drivers or chauffeurs to take them around town. But people with restless minds, they cannot sit in the car without trying to do some backseat driving. So seated in the back seat, they keep on telling the driver, ऐसा करो, इधर कट मारो, जल्दी जल्दी जाओ, लाइट चेंज हो रहा है, ट्रैफिक लाइट चेंज हो रहा है. So they harass the driver and drive him nuts. Unfortunately, this behavior of backseat driving is there in all of us. We are constantly telling God what we want from him. But indeed, God is seated in your heart and he is driving you onward towards your destiny. You are merely seated in a motor car, a machine made of material energy, and you have to surrender to him. Tam eva sharanam gaccha. You have to surrender unto him. Sarva bhavena bharata. Fully trust him in all circumstances, in all moods, in everything. And that way you will get supreme peace. He also says, Sarvasya chaham hridi sanvishto matasmritir jnanam apohanam cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. Again, you will see when we come to chapter 15, where there is further elaboration of the Paramatma. It clearly states that there are two types of individual souls. Those who have not realized their spiritual identity, they are called ksharas. That means they're subject to birth and death, or they imagine they're dying and they're being born again. And the other is called aksharas, one who is kutasto, who's not affected in heat and cold, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor, because they know they're not Prakriti, they know they are the individual soul. But then Krishna elaborates in the very next verse. Uttama Purusha Tva Anya Paramatmeti Udarita Ya Lokotrayam Vishya Bibhatya Avyaya Ishvaraha. He says, you may be a realized soul, or you may be a soul who is not yet realized his spiritual identity. But the Supreme Lord who is seated in your heart is separate. Uttama Purusha, the Supreme One, Supreme Lord, is separate from the realized soul and the unrealized soul. And seated in the heart, he says, he is called Paramatma. So, this is the first introduction of Paramatma in the Bhagavad-Geeta. Now, I think we will stop here because this was important for you to understand that you have a Kshetrajna, or the individual soul who knows this field, and then you have a Sarva Kshetrajna. You have a one who knows this field and one who knows all fields, which is the Paramatma. So the Kshetrajna is situated within the heart. You will see that later as we come to the conclusion of the Bhagavad-Gita. Yatha Prakashatyeka, there is just like the sun illumines the solar system. Imam Kritsnam Ravi, Tatha Shetram Kritsnam Prakashatyo Bharata. That similarly the soul situated within the heart illuminates the entire body with consciousness. Just like the Sarva Kshetrajna illuminates all bodies with consciousness. So it's very clear here that Prakriti is the field, your physical body, mind, intelligence, ego, that the individual soul is separate from that. Of course, because he is infinitesimal, he is struggling with it. He will come later to the point where he says, Mamaivamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manashastendriyani prakritistani karshati. Because you are simply an ounce, a fragment of me, you are struggling with your six senses that include your mind. And it's very difficult for the individual soul to overcome Prakriti, because this Prakriti is also Krishna's divine energy. Daivi asagunamayi mama maya duratyaya mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam karantite. This Prakriti is my divine energy. You cannot overcome it on your own. But when you surrender unto me, then you will cross beyond it. So with this, I will conclude today's session. Tomorrow, next Thursday, we will try to cover further details of the gross or the macro aspects of Prakriti. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes, are there any questions? Surabhi, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
So are there any questions from anyone?
Yes. Um, just a minute, yes. So my first question is, in your opinion, how can we apply the teachings of this chapter to manage stress or anxiety in daily life?
The knowledge that you are not this body, mind, intelligence, or ego is that knowledge which you use as an axe to chop down your attachment to the world. This is what is described in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. And when this knowledge you apply to the understanding that God is in full control of everything, He is directing my destiny, I should not fight with Him, let me go with the flow. There are things which are beyond my control. You learn to surrender. And it is through surrender that one gets peace.
And my next question, Shantanuji, is how does the understanding of matter and spirit influence one's attitude towards death and rebirth?
See, you have nothing to do with matter. You are simply an observer of matter. At best, you can call yourself a nimit matra. If you want to go beyond the idea of being sakshi, you are just nimitta matra. You are merely an instrument. Krishna reveals to Arjun that the Mahabharata is already fought. The Kauravas are already dead. Only you and your brothers who are the victors are alive. Now understand this, that you are doing nothing. I am doing everything through Prakriti. You simply be my instrument, nimitta matra. So when you realize that whatever is happening in life is happening under his guidance, and you are merely an instrument of Krishna, the instrument of destiny, as planned by him, you will get a lot of peace.
Thank you, Shantnuji, for such a wonderful session today. And to all our viewers, if you like this video, then do like it and share it with your loved ones. Also, stay tuned as we meet again on next Thursday at 8 a.m. for yet another session on the Bhagavad Gita. Hare
So
Krishna.
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.